Hello, my name is Rachel Graham, and I am a kindergarten to second grade BD teacher. I did my research proposal using the PBIS check-in, check-out intervention for behavior disorder elementary students. When I started my research, I was in my second semester of being a behavior disorder teacher. I had currently before been just a resource teacher, so this was something new for me. I have learned that my students' behaviors have affected their academic success. Cook et al. States that behavior can be linked with academic success. My students struggle with exhibiting compliant and acceptable behaviors, and their academic abilities usually reflect this struggle. They tend to, if their behaviors are higher, more extreme, then their academics seem to start to struggle because of it. PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports, has many different intervention options. One option is the check-in, check-out intervention. I wanted to see if using the check-in, check-out intervention would assist my students in decreasing their non-compliant behaviors and increasing their academic success, specifically with reading fluency. Students that struggle with their behaviors have difficulties with the general education setting and sometimes have a harder time gaining the academic knowledge they need to be successful in the classroom or in any academic setting. The check-in, check-out intervention is one of the PBIS interventions. Swazowski, McDaniel, Jolivet, and Malus concluded that a check-in, check-out intervention could be successful when used in small groups. They used theirs in a residential setting. They had 4 participants, and for those 4, 3 out of the 4 showed progress directly using the check-in, check-out intervention. One student did not show as much success, so they implemented a check-up in the middle of the day as well. Having included that, made that student also be successful in their study. PBIS is a multi-tiered approach to seek to prevent acting out behaviors and to create safe, respectful, and happy school communities, as Bradshaw, Koth, Bevins, Ilongo, and Leaf stated. And Cook et al. Concluded that there was a strong correlation between students' reading achievement and their ability to exhibit compliant behaviors. During my literature review, I focused on behavioral problems in the elementary school setting. Brune, McDaniels, Fernando, and Troughton concluded that to be successful in the general education classroom, students with emotional and behavioral disorders need interventions such as self-management, making good choices, problem-solving, self-advocacy, and goal setting. These students need additional services to help them do what they need to do within the classroom so that they are meeting those goals and are able to follow the directions and just being able to be in a classroom and maintain the proper behaviors. I also looked into behavioral effects on reading fluency. And there is a direct link, as stated by Cook et al., that between reading fluency and disruptive behaviors, there is a link. When the reading intervention is implemented, reading scores increase and non-compliant behaviors can decrease as well. So there is an actual link between them, so that when a student is reading and wanting to read, then they are also, their behaviors typically decrease because they're active and involved in wanting to do what they need to do. When a student with a behavioral problem does not want to read, it can affect their reading fluency as well. When a student is non-compliant and has refusals, then their reading scores can be affected because of their choice of not wanting to read. I also looked into the Positive Behavior Intervention System, PBIS. It is an intervention strategy system that's created to positively change school environments by assisting in collecting data, working on discipline issues, and developing positive reinforcement options, as stated by Bradshaw et al. The National Education Association states that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, names the PBIS system as the only support system that deals with behaviors in a multi-tiered fashion. PBIS has many tiers, and you can be at a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3, depending on the needs that that student has. The check-in, check-out intervention is a tier 2 intervention, so it can be worked with small groups and smaller settings. A tier 3 would be typically one-on-one, and a tier 1 would be like your entire classroom. Another very important part of the check-in, check-out intervention system is having parental involvement. The parents are a critical part of the school team because the family knows the student the best, and they're able to tell you what they've tried, what works, what does not work, and how to best implement an intervention. They're also usually the best cheerleaders, the ones that are willing to help that child as much as possible. So something that you implement at school can also be implemented at home as long as you can get parental involvement as well. So then I looked really into what the check-in, check-out intervention had and what was a part of that. It is one of the most commonly used tier 2 interventions for PBIS, as stated by Ross and Sabley. And according to Crone, Hawken, and Horner, the check-in, check-out intervention has a 5-step process. You start the day with that meeting with that mentor teacher, and you go over the goals and what the student is planning for the day. This is where you might decide maybe that student is going to get 80% for their day, or whatever it happens to be on their daily teacher or a daily behavior chart. So then the student goes throughout his day, his or her day, and they would have that chart filled out by all the other teachers that they work with, and so then the child is also seeing how they are currently doing throughout the day as they go. Then at the end of the day, the student would check back in with that mentor teacher, and they would discuss if they met the goal, if they did not meet the goal, why they didn't meet the goal, or if they did meet it, how did they meet it, and just going through the process of seeing the best things that happened and what they also need to do better for the next day. Then the student would take that chart home and do that same kind of discussion with the parents. So the parents are going to also talk about, you know, what was your goal for the day? How did it work? And just having some of those discussions at home. Then the parent would sign the form, and then the next day the student would bring it back. So when they do check-in with that mentor first thing in the morning, they would then also bring that chart back from the day before, so that that teacher knows that they have had that time with the parent and they've had that discussion as well. So then they would start that process over, making a new goal for the day, talking about how they can achieve that goal, what they need to do, just kind of things like that. So my objective in my research project was to find out what relationship, if any, exists between compliant behaviors and reading fluency. Does decreased non-compliant behaviors help increase reading fluency scores? So the purpose of this study was to determine if the implementation of the PBIS Tier 2 check-in, check-out intervention decreased the frequency that students with behavioral disorders exhibited those non-compliant behaviors. So I predicted that the use of that Tier 2 check-in, check-out intervention would actually decrease the non-compliant behaviors and increase their reading fluency scores. This has an impact in every classroom by allowing those general education teachers and special education teachers to develop a new intervention to help assist in decreasing those non-compliant behaviors and hopefully then also increasing reading fluency scores. When I looked at starting my study, I had to look at the students that I had in my classes. So all of my students have individualized education plans, or IEPs, because I work with special education students. But I also had to then look at to see which students had behavior goals and a reading fluency goal so that I could monitor both things. One of my students had just that. The other one also had an additional math goal as well, but we were not monitoring that part. We just did the reading fluency. Both of my participants were male students in 2nd grade, but they did have different general education classrooms. I just had 2 participants because that was the only ones that would fit my criteria. Both of my students received specially designed instruction in reading and in behavioral social skills, and I did their specially designed instruction for social skills. They actually had a different resource special education teacher for their reading, but they both had the same one. And my study was completed in an AB format. So we had both of the phases A that were non-treatment times, and then phases B that were treatment phases. So we did a non-treatment, a treatment, a non-treatment, and a treatment, and then we looked at the data from that. When doing data collection, in my phases, in the A phases, the data was collected using the teacher-made daily behavior chart, and we did the formative assessment system for teachers, the FAST reading probes. During the B phases, we had those same data collection options, but there was also then when the mentor teacher was meeting with that student and for the check-in, check-out intervention. Each phase lasted about 3 weeks in length, and data was considered from using both the phase A's and the phase B's to determine if the check-in, check-out intervention was effective. My hypothesis: since research has shown that the check-in, check-out intervention is effective in reducing behaviors, and reduced behaviors increase reading fluency, it was hypothesized that there would be a decrease in the frequency of non-compliant behaviors and an increase in reading fluency scores among students with behavioral disorders as a result of implementing the check-in, check-out intervention. The hypothesis was not supported. Participants' non-compliant behaviors did not decrease significantly, and participants' reading fluency scores did not increase. For my results, during the first AB phase, non-compliant behaviors, they did decrease based on the paired samples t-test and p-value. T of 29 is 2.504 with a p-value of 0.018. Now, during the first AB phase, the reading fluency scores did not increase based on the paired samples t-test and p-value. T5 equals negative 1.439, p-value 0.210. During the second AB phase, non-compliant behaviors did not decrease based on the paired samples t-test and p-value. T29 was equal to negative 0.174 with a p-value of 0.863. And during the second AB phase, reading fluency scores did not increase based on the paired samples t-test and p-value. T5 was equal to 0.598 with a p-value of 0.576. This table displays the baseline and treatment phase data for reading and behavior. So in there it shows the baseline data and the treatment phases for their mean and standard deviation for both reading and behavior, and also the t-test, the p-value, and the Cohen's d. And so this was for both the first AB phase and then the second AB phase of the study. This table gave the participants' baseline and treatment phase data for just behavior, and this included both participants and gave their separate scores for both the first AB phase and the second AB phase. This table gave the baseline and treatment phase data for reading for both participants in their separate amounts. So it included their baseline and their during their intervention phase for both AB, the first phase, and the second. So the data did indicate a slight correlation between the check-in, check-out intervention and decreased non-compliant behaviors, but there was no correlation between the check-in, check-out intervention and increased reading fluency scores. Additional research is needed to determine the correlation between non-compliant behaviors and reading scores. Some implications and recommendations. More research is needed to determine the correlation between the non-compliant behaviors and reading scores. Oakes et al. Concluded inconclusive results with their study as well. Results indicated that while an increase in knowledge was gained, the participants were not at a level that was considered mastery. That's the same as, or very similar results as what I had in my study with the non-compliant behaviors during the first treatment phase of the study. More research is needed to be completed using a wider scale of participants to determine what correlation there is between behavior and reading fluency. Some of the limitations in this study was that the sample size was an extremely limited group with only having 2 participants, and both of them being in 2nd grade. There was also a limited amount of time to implement the study. 3 weeks for each phase is not long enough. There was also validity and reliability issues within this study. The teacher-made behavior chart is not research-based and therefore has no validity of itself. So in conclusion, additional research is needed to determine what correlation, if any, exists between behavior and reading fluency. And this study did not have positive results, but more research is still needed to determine additional results on the check-in, check-out intervention in correlation to reading fluency. Here are some of the references. Thank you for listening to my study.